Welcome to the Joyful Nourishment podcast, a place for conversations around all things food, eating, body image and nourishment. Here we'll explore and unpack all the things that gets in the way of us having a kind, compassionate relationship with food and eating in our bodies, and also how we can find our way back to joyful nourishment in our everyday lives. I'm your host, Lynn Thorstenson, a registered nutrition therapist and body image coach based in the west of Ireland, and I am so glad that you're here. Today we have Louise George, who is a Humanistic Integrative Counsellor. She's a senior yoga teacher and a certified mobility specialist. Louise utilises a holistic approach to dealing with a variety of physical and emotional issues, and is particularly interested in combining tools from yoga into therapy sessions as a means of improving nervous system regulation. She offers group yoga classes and one-to-one yoga sessions, as well as individual therapy sessions and workshops. And Louise's specialist area of interest for therapy is in eating disorders, and she has over 20 years of experience working in this field. She's also a coach for Eating Freely, which is a 6-month program for people with emotional eating issues. And she has her yoga studio in Douglas, County Cork in Ireland. So thank you so much for being here, Louise. And we know each other, so this isn't like the first time we're having a conversation, but it's really cool that you're here with me for this experience.
I'm delighted to be here.
So I was thinking, I'm always curious, I think, about people, what brings them to the work that you do. So, you know, your work is really embedded in yoga therapy and centered around, I know you do work outside of the eating disorder field as well, but like you do a lot of work with that, and that was kind of your original background, right? How you come to that work. So if you want to share a bit about the background story to like how you come to work as a counselor, as a therapist, a yoga teacher, and also in the space of eating issues.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, it all kind of happened quite organically, really. As a teenager, I struggled with my own eating issues. So I was anorexic and I was bulimic and I binge ate, and, you know, and that probably went on for maybe 5, 6, 7 years or something like that. So obviously, having had that personal experience, that's really where my interest was. Firstly, in just sorting myself out. And then, you know, that urge to want to sort of pass on what I'd learned and maybe help somebody else out. So I did take some time for traveling and things like that, and to do my own work on myself. And then I decided that I thought maybe counselling might be something that I'd enjoy. I had a degree already in sort of communication studies and sociology and psychology. So I already had an interest in people and the way, you know, things worked and how people ticked. And so that was something that I decided might fit for me. And I just thoroughly enjoyed every minute of my training. Yeah. So that's kind of the field that I went into. And the decision to work with people with eating problems was sort of an obvious one, I think, but it's difficult to go into a field that's been very personal to you. So, you know, that took a bit of time to kind of make sure that I was really over my issues and that I wasn't going to get sort of pulled back into anything. But that thankfully didn't happen. And I had a sort of probably 12-year career in the UK of working in specialist eating disorder services. So okay. That's really the background to the counselling side of things.
Yeah, I didn't know that actually, that you had a degree in sociology and psychology before you started the counselling journey, which makes sense, like that the leap was quite short then from there on to the kind of the professional application.
Yeah, I worked, actually my first job after university was in a local TV station, a sort of cable TV. So we
Okay.
made local TV programs for the local people, using the local people as kind of our cameramen and women and presenters and stuff, which is a brilliant job. But that was me thinking, oh, maybe I'll go into sort of television, or, you know, I quite like the idea of being a researcher, because
Okay.
again, I was really curious about what made people tick. So there's always been that. And I think in every job application or CV I've ever written, I've said, I'm interested in what makes people tick. So
Very interesting.
I've been writing that since I was 18 years old, you know. Yeah.
And that's a good quality, I think, as well, to bring to the table as a counselor, but also like as a yoga instructor, and kind of that sense of curiosity. I also want.
I think it could go. It's interesting because I have a daughter who's a bit the same, and she's quite interested in marketing, you know. And again, you kind of need to understand what makes people tick for marketing. So it's kind of, you know, it's a basic thing that could go in many different directions. But I suppose because of my own experiences with eating disorders, that was, you know, the more obvious one for me.
Yeah, but it was a good point you made as well around, because I think a lot of people who work in the field, not everybody, but a lot of people come to it through their own personal journeys. Definitely true for myself, but being aware, like even if you're not fully recovered, but being aware of like the potentialities of like being pulled back, or how the work could affect you, and just, I suppose, having the right support around oneself as a professional working with other people.
Yeah, well, after I qualified, my first job was in Liverpool University, and they had a psychology service there where the professor who was the head of the service ran an eating disorders unit. And the funny thing was I'd been a student at Liverpool University when I was anorexic. And so it was kind of full circle for me to go back there as a member of staff. But I took that job voluntarily, and I didn't get paid for the first 6 months that I worked there, because I was so keen to, you know, I suppose prove my worth for one, but also I just really wanted to do it, and I wanted to make sure I was able for it. So it was a good route in, you know, especially my own eating disorders were not that far in the past, you know. So I kind of gradually let myself into it, I suppose.
And how did you then go from there into like yoga? What sort of led you onto that path? And I'm really curious as well in that sense of, you know, eating disorder can be really like make us very disembodied. So like yoga is that kind of route into the body. And what is that kind of path?
Yeah, I think I was disembodied. And I think, to be honest with you, I think you can work as a psychologist or a psychotherapist or a counselor and still be quite disembodied, you know, disconnected in some ways. I know we're helping our clients get in touch with their feelings rather. But I think for me, working in that field, I had a really good understanding of what it felt like for clients, because obviously I'd experienced it. And whilst I didn't talk about my own experience, a lot of my clients would kind of either guess or they'd question, have you been through this? Because you seem to understand how this feels so well. So that was an aspect to it. But in terms of me really having a really good relationship with my body, I don't think that was there, honestly and truthfully, at that time. I think I had the intellectual understanding and the experience, but I still don't think that I'd completely got to that point myself of being really, as you said, embodied. So when I moved to Ireland, I was 39, I think. And as I moved to Ireland, as you know, my mum passed away. And I think not just about feeling disembodied, but feeling totally like disconnected from my friends, the country that I'd grown up with, my family. Obviously, I'd lost my mum. I was living in Ireland. I took it all very easily, the whole move. I was, this would be an adventure. And the reality of it was actually really difficult. And I'd left my career. And as I said, I think I just was like free floating at the time. And my anxiety levels were very high. And I knew, again, intellectually, you know, that what anxiety was and all of that, and different ways to deal with it. And I was qualified as a CBT therapist and all of that. But really, I was searching for something more. And I started then getting interested in Reiki and holistic therapies and meditation classes and chanting workshops, and I tried the whole shebang. And then I got to a point where I sort of had the insight one day. I was doing yoga, I was going to yoga classes as well, and then I had the insight that actually this is all sort of yoga related. This is all comes under the umbrella of yoga. So I carried on doing yoga for a little bit longer, and then I signed up for a yoga teacher training. But really it was because I knew there was something in it for me. I knew that there was something there that I was missing. I also met some amazing people that were very like-minded, and that was a really, really helpful thing for me, the connection. But yeah, I think yoga showed me how disconnected I was from my body. And I don't think I'd even known that. I don't think I even had an inkling that I was still so disconnected. Yeah.
That is so interesting. And do you see that like now when you're working in that space, both with therapy and as a yoga teacher, like what are you observing in that space, like on people's connections with their bodies? Like, I mean, I think even we can say we know we live in a society where we're like mostly valued from the head up, from the neck up. And, like I see a lot of people, including myself, at times we're just like, we don't have a concept of where our bodies are at, but like our bodies are always in the present moment. It's like the mind can travel everywhere else. So I'm just kind of curious, like what are you observing?
Before I even moved to Ireland, I was doing, it's funny really, because I was doing this CBT training, which is, as you know, cognitive behavioral therapy, which I think is quite heady. It's very cognitive. And I really struggled with it because I was a mother of 2 young children, and I was just a bit burnt out physically. But anyway, I was doing this course, and my anxiety levels around this training were so high because I think because I was just burnt out. But we went on holiday not long after I'd done that course, and I can remember sitting in this caravan in the rain in the north of France somewhere. And I sat up in the bed and I thought, if I don't stop doing this to myself, I'm going to make myself really ill. And then I kind of caught that, and I thought, hang on a minute, which part of me is doing what to which part of me? It was just this moment of kind of, this lucid moment of awareness where I sort of, when I really thought about it, I realized it's my head that is dragging my body along. And so if my head doesn't stop doing this, dragging me along to myself, which is my soul, or I'm going to make myself really ill. And I didn't quite know what to do with that at the time, but I had that awareness that I was pushing and pushing and pushing myself, and that it wasn't going to end well. But it was around that time that we made the decision to move to Ireland. So I think there's a part of me thought, I'm going to get this lovely space when I go to Ireland, and I'm going to sort of learn how to really mind myself better. But the reality of it was that obviously losing my mom, and then, this change of scene, it was quite hard. So, but in the end, I suppose that awareness made me go on the search for something deeper, that sense of a bit more embodied. So in answer to your question, I think what I see a lot in my yoga students, because they're seeing it as exercise often, are these kind of A-type personalities as well, where they want to go stronger and they want to, feel the burn, or they want to feel more stretch, or they want to hold it for longer. And the way I teach yoga isn't really like that. So I can sometimes see the frustration in people that it's not fast enough, or we're not going deep enough, or and on the other side, in therapy, I get people then that might cry, and then they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, this isn't me. I'm not usually like this. And they reject the part of them that's emotional. Or so it's interesting. You kind of see on both sides, the people that they don't want to get into their feelings, and either they're pushing through exercise, or they're trying to bottle things up. And it's kind of,
that's so, I think it's really interesting, I suppose, because it feels like when I listen to you talk about it, it's like either side of those is still a kind of rejection of the body, or a kind of a dissociation in a way, but it's just like one is like stuffing it down or pretending it doesn't exist, that we're not feeling these hard things, and the other one is like, I just want to feel more, or push and try to sort of stretch the limit. And it just feels like the opposite side of the same coin, and neither, which is
but
like
both
helpful.
are trying to get somewhere. It's like, I want to get there. And it's like, I often ask in my class, sometimes I'll say we're nearly there, and then I go, wherever there is, because where is it that we're trying to get to? And with clients, they want to get it all out and put it all away again and be sorted and fixed. And with the yoga students, like, they want to get there to the ultimate pose or the ultimate yoga body or whatever it is. We're all chasing something.
I know. It's just, and when you pause and you think about that, and it's like, but like, what's the end goal? Like the grave, you know what I mean? Like what are we rushing towards, or what are we pushing towards? In that larger sense, it's like, well, one day it's over. So then,
and we're trying not to feel it too much along the way, whereas,
it's just, and I know you do workshops as well, and like that's one of your things. And I know some years ago, pre that C thingy, we did a couple of collaborations as well. And I know your yoga, like you do a lot of yin and resting yoga, and really like helping people to like move towards that very difficult place of like feeling but relaxing. Do you want to talk a bit more about that kind of work that you do as well in that space?
When I came to yoga, when I first came to Ireland, like I say, I was nearly 40 when I came to yoga, and I'm 54 now. But I actually couldn't lie down on the floor at the end for the relaxation. I was fine with the movement part, the pushing bit, but the actual just being still and just relaxing was a lot for me, and it surprised me. And I would find myself feeling tearful when I lay down and overwhelmed, and because I guess that's where the feelings were bubbling up, and I see that in students also. I see them struggling, their eyes are opening and closing, and they're twiddling their fingers, and they're not able to just let go. It's not easy, really, for a lot of people. No. But yeah, we sort of, I suppose I've lost my train there. Where was I going? What did you ask me?
Yeah, the workshops that you do around, I know you ran something recently, like around befriending your nervous system. And I know in those workshop spaces, you bring in some theory and then movements, and that kind of bridging that gap around, using movements also as that space of connecting with our emotions. Our inner landscape.
And I think it's sort of, it does take both, it's like movement is great for some people, and stillness is great for other people. And not everybody can be still, and not everybody wants to be constantly moving. But I think, like with the workshops, what I'm trying to do with my workshops at the moment is really blend the therapy and the yoga in a way that, you see, with yoga, obviously there's a whole, yoga philosophy. The philosophy of yoga actually ties in quite well with a lot of sort of therapy theory. But what I'm trying to do is help people to sort of connect to their body by slow, gentle, mindful movement. So like my yoga classes are not really particularly strong, but we will move all parts of the body in as many different ways as we can, and do that mindfully, so that you're sort of connecting to your fingers and your toes. It's not about making a shape, it's not about creating a pose, it's just about the experience of being in your body. And then when I'm doing the workshop, particularly the workshop I'm running at the moment, the nervous system one, I'm trying to explain to people how, really what our body wants and what our mind and soul want are to feel safe. And I think that just took me a really long time to really understand that nearly everything that I've ever done has been to try to make myself feel safe. So like with the eating disorders that I had, I was either binging and trying to stuff feelings down, with food, or I was starving to try and numb myself that way, so that I didn't really feel anything. I was trying not to fill myself up, just trying not to feel. And I think, I'm trying to help people to understand that whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's addiction, whether it's over-exercising, whether it's, numbing out on the television or online shopping, or we're actually trying to make ourselves feel safe, and we're trying to get needs met, but it just doesn't always happen in a really sort of healthy, like using your terminology, nourishing way, you know. But we are trying. And I think when people can kind of understand how the nervous system works, then it takes away a lot of this sort of judgment and blame. I think we're really good at beating ourselves up and judging ourselves, when actually, when you come at that from the point of view of like, we are animals and we are nervous systems, and we're really, really trying to keep ourselves safe. I think the more that I've understood that, the kinder I've been to myself, and the more that really it's like the pennies have started to drop into place. Like, so like, and we all have these different, I don't want to go too deep into that, but we all have these different parts of ourselves, and sometimes they feel like they're sabotaging us, but actually I still believe even those parts are just trying to keep us safe.
I would be on the same kind of way of thinking like you, and I also feel, but for myself and for what I see with the people I work with, is like when you come at it from that sort of, you know, like when you can say, well, it's we're doing it for a reason. I don't believe I do things for no reason at all. It might seem like that on the outside, or it might even seem like that to ourselves, but like there is, if you dig a bit deeper, there's a reason. And often it is like, it's down to that, like what you're saying, keeping yourself safe, or trying to meet a basic need. Like even with the eating, like when people are binge eating, and it's like, well, you're probably binge eating because if you haven't been eating for the last 10 hours, or you've been trying to restrict food for the last few weeks or months or whatever, it's like, that's physiology. And like the nervous system is also physiology, right? It's physiology. It's like, you're not defunct, you're actually functioning quite well. It's just, it's not working so well anymore. It's become a bit maladaptive, and like, what can we put in place? But it does remove that, some layer anyway, I think, like what you're saying, of judgment and shame.
It becomes so automatic and you know, so habitual that it's unconscious, isn't it? So much of it. And I think it's bringing that into people's conscious awareness. And so, you know, it's amazing really how many people come up to me after a yoga class and they've had some sort of insight, or they say to me, I feel really, really centered and grounded when I've practiced yoga. And when I go away from a yoga class, I feel like I make better decisions, because I feel like I make that decision from, you know, someplace deeper in me than just in my head or worrying about what other people might think. And that's an outcome that I would try and get from a therapy session, but they're getting that outcome just from a yoga class. Do you know? So what they're saying is basically the yoga, the slow mindful movement, is bringing them back into connection with themselves. And when they're in connection with their self, they know what they want. They know what's good for them, you know? Whereas oftentimes we're so much in our head, or we're so busy working on automatic pilot. We don't know what we're doing or why we're doing it. We're just continually doing the same things, even when they don't work, you know?
Or grasping for, like, looking at what other people are doing, or what other people, we might think other people think we should be doing, or we think we should be doing according to what other people are doing. Like, there's all of that kind of external outsourcing, instead of when we are feeling so disconnected. So but I think that's just what you're talking about there is, like, I've heard people calling it, like, you know, using the body as a resource in that work. It's like the body's a resource in your yoga classes that is helping people connect them to themselves.
I think I was practicing yoga for a number of years before I had the insight that yoga is therapy, that yoga is, we're coming from the body, and that's having an impact on the mind. So like that person saying to me, oh, I feel so grounded and I'm making good decisions. You know, they're coming at it from the body point of view, but it's impacting their mind. And then with therapy, you might be coming at it more at the mind and the emotional level, but then it's going to impact into your body, you know. So it's kind of coming, and I suppose that's the way that I see, you know, therapists are now going and doing yoga trainings, and they're learning about the breath, and they're learning these nervous system regulation tools that all come from yoga. They've all been in yoga for thousands of years, you know. It's just that now we have science to explain them. And then you've got yoga teachers that are realizing that, you know, the people coming to them have maybe lots of emotional issues or mental health issues, and they have anxiety, and that they're going off and learning about therapy more. And I think it's how it should be, because if we're looking to become more embodied, then we can't separate those things off, can we?
Exactly. It just goes back to that, was it Descartes, like we're still living with the legacy of that separation. And hopefully slowly we're coming back around to bringing it together, because it's like, don't go away with you don't just take out the brain and go off and give it to the psychiatrist or there, off you go, you can have a look at this now. But it's, that's kind of part of the system that we're currently, like the medical model that we're in. So, this is how everybody's trained to think about stuff separately, where it's actually all one system, one person.
Mm. And society is very much focused on doing rather than being. It's like Shakespeare said, to be or not to be. He didn't say to do or not to do.
Or what's that other one? Like, we're called human beings, not human doings. But
absolutely,
it most certainly feels like that. And again, that sense of, I think Brené Brown talks about this a lot, like, and that sort of like badge of honor of, how are you doing? Oh, I'm so busy. I'm like, I'm so busy. And then people say, and like, I start saying sometimes, people's like, yeah, how are things going? I'm like, well, I'm not that busy. Oh, he'll pick up, like, he'll get busier, like, but maybe I don't want to be that busy.
Absolutely.
Basically, what you're saying, I think, or what we're saying is like trying to slow down and do less and being okay with that is good or important, but it's also often really difficult.
Very, yeah. Slowing down be the hardest thing, I think.
Yeah. I mean,
then you have to feel.
You do, and I could tell a story here of like when I went to my first silent retreat and sitting still for a couple of days. It wasn't actually the silence that was that difficult, because what I realized was through the silence of the environment was I could really hear my inner chatter. Like, it was incessant, and it was like, oh my God, would it ever stop? And then also that sense of like what you're saying, what you were talking about earlier in your yoga class in the beginning, like how difficult it was to just do nothing. I think it was 2 days into this, it was 3 full days of silence and like 2 half days either side of that. And we were in the second day, and it was like excruciating. I was actually in quite a lot of physical pain as well from sitting still. But just like, I just wanted to do something, like anything, like chopping a few vegetables was like such a joy, because I was doing something where it was so challenging to just like sit and noticing how my mind literally never stopped talking.
And I think that's like, I always say to people in my yoga classes, when we come at the beginning or at the end, when we come to stillness, notice as you come into stillness, as your body becomes more still, what happens in your mind. And people's minds just start bouncing, like, oh, I didn't put the thing out for the dog, and I got to collect that thing, and I forgot to tell him I'm going to phone, and later on I'm going to, and it's just like, but I suppose it's the skill of just acknowledging, wow, look how busy my mind is, like you would, oh, it's a really cloudy day, but we don't feel like, oh, I've got to analyze every thought, or I've got to follow each one. I can just let it be cloudy, and be with that. But for me, lying on the floor, that was like after I'd lost my mum, and I think that I'd powered through that a little bit because obviously I'd just moved to Ireland and my kids were small, and I was trying to help them to settle, and obviously they were my priority, and I don't think that I was able to really grieve as fully because I had kids around me the whole time, and I didn't have the people around me that I would have grieved with, one of whom was my mum, and some of my best friends in England and stuff. So I think I'd held on to a lot of that grief, and even just those short 5 or 10 minutes at the end of a yoga class, just lying down and closing my eyes and going inwards was enough to, have me, I had little pools of tears in my ears, they sort of slid out of my eyes, but like that, like silent tears that would just, I was leaking, it was, so just coming to stillness can be very powerful, and slowing down and just being with is very hard for a lot of people.
Very hard, and I think incredibly healing. Like, if you can like what I found in that retreat, it was actually at the end of it, it was transformational. It opened up something that I had never experienced before, like because of the space and the container, and it just kind of, I know it's hard to explain, but it was like there was a shift to actually, because I had sort of like, moved through it. And it's that moving through. If it had gotten too much and I had just gone home in the middle of it, I wouldn't have got to that other end. But it just felt like, oh, this is peace. And it's like, oh, just moving slower, at least for a few days before I was sort of integrated back into it. It is so hard and it can be so painful, but it is also so healing. And in a world where, since we got the smartphones, like you and I are a bit older, so like we grew up with all this technology, but like this stuff and stimulus like all the time, constantly. So you have to almost like, you have to do these things on intention, like going to a yoga class where somebody gives you permission to lay down for 10 minutes, or going to a retreat and, where you've been told, turn off your phone for a few days or whatever. That it's almost like we have to intentionally set those breaks, because they're not there. Everything is just filled constantly all the time.
Yeah, and it's like you say, it's the going through it. It's like you can't go around like big emotions, and you have to go through them. But I think even when you bring that again, like I often say, what we do on the mat is what we do off the mat. So like if I have somebody in my class and maybe I'm doing, like if I'm teaching, say, sun salutation, there's a certain flow to that which pose is coming next. And you get sometimes people and they've moved on already to the next pose before I've even called it out. They're getting on with it. They want to get there, wherever there is again, but, and sometimes even if I see that, I might change things up a little bit so that they don't know what's coming, so that then they have to stay with it. But even the thing of like, if you hold a yoga pose, in a yoga flow class, you go through the pose into the next pose and into the next pose. The way I teach it is hatha yoga, and we would take a pose and then we breathe into the pose. So you breathe and you use the breath to create the space and to create the stretch and to open through the rib cage, and you're staying in it and you're breathing into it. And it's kind of bringing that then into therapy. Oh, I noticed something move through you there, or you appeared to be feeling something. What was the feeling, and can we stay with it? Because oftentimes we're straight into our heads. Oh, well, I was just thinking that blah, blah, blah. No, but what were you feeling? And can you breathe into that? Can you let that stay there for a while and just feel it? And it's slowing people down and allowing them to experience and to stay with and to let it move through. It's very, very powerful.
Yeah. And how do you see that? And I suppose we're talking about, our relationship with food and eating, and when we're struggling with that, because it is that kind of like trying to avoid those difficult feelings, or we're using food to numb out, or we're using restriction to numb out or not to feel, and like creating that space to actually building capacity to be with our inner experiences. Like what are a couple of things that, say, if you were sharing with people that are listening, that what you have found useful for yourself or in your clinical work?
I think it's so difficult to say, because everybody is so unique. And I suppose, having had a range of different eating disorders, I've experienced, as I said before, not eating as a way to feel kind of almost cleaned out. I'm like empty. I'm just hollow. There's nothing going on here. And a denial of any neediness and a denial of any feelings, just this kind of echo chamber of emptiness. I've experienced feeling like that, or craving feeling like that. I've then also experienced the other end of that, where I've been eating so much food so quickly that I cannot fill myself up, that I am like that bottomless pit and nothing is making me feel satisfied, and that need is never ending, and my needs are overwhelming me. And I've experienced everything in between. you know, it's interesting actually. I was in Liverpool there a couple of weeks ago, and we went for breakfast, and we just had, I think it was like sourdough bread and eggs and avocados, and just a really kind of normal sort of brunch. And but I remember sitting there and saying, God, I feel really grounded after that. I feel really like just satisfied and nourished, you know. And it's not often that I really focus on that feeling, but just in that moment, I was like, oh yeah, that feels really good. And I feel really solid and steady. And it just made me think about all those years that I'd spent in these opposite ends of that spectrum of totally empty and never full enough. And
yeah,
but I think with clients, it's a case of teaching them to stay with the feelings and to be with those feelings and not run away from them. And I think that's the first thing. And oftentimes when I'm working, not necessarily just around food, but with emotions in general, I'll sometimes say to a client, do you want to maybe bring your hand and place it onto your chest and just feel the weight of your hand and feel the warmth of your hand and feel that connection of your hand and your heart, and just to kind of connect to yourself, to your body, and to breathe into that space and to see what's coming up for you. And it's amazing how many times that will often make somebody cry. You know, it's like they're suddenly checking in, and they're feeling in.
yeah,
And I think there's just so much. And listen, I've done this like more than anybody, with rationalizing and analyzing and being in my head. I'm a very, very heady person. And I love that. I love that, analyzing things and going off down rabbit holes. I'm as do you. I know, and we spent many 3-hour lunches doing things. But, you know, but really, that the simple act of coming back to myself and going, how are you? You know, how am I in this moment? It's really, that's where the work is, you know.
Yeah, I also love that kind of hand on chest and stuff, and that
And
it's just
breathing, taking a few like literally, both in my yoga classes and in my counseling sessions, you know, I'll often say, just take a breath in and then just let it go. Like, you know, like breathe out through your mouth, sigh it out, blow it out, whatever you want to do, but then breathe in again and let it go.
yeah,
And breathe in again and let it go.
Ah,
And 3 breaths, is enough to connect. It's enough to just give you that space to go, okay, where am I now? You know, and has something shifted, or as it, you know, just to really feel. But that simple act of a hand on your heart and a few breaths can be so powerful, you know.
and so simple. And those are things as well that are available to us at all times. You know, it's not like we need this particular device or tool, or like, these are very accessible ways of connecting with ourselves and with our, and body based as well, like in that sense, like using the body as a resource.
Yeah, to my students and my clients, your breath is with you everywhere you go, and every breath is happening in this moment. It's not happening in the future. We can't breathe into the future. We can't breathe the breath that we breathed in the past. It's now. So if you can connect to your breath and just focus on the breath moving through the body, then that is bringing you into the now. And it's, like you say, it's so simple.
Yeah. So I want to wrap up, but I have 2 questions that I wanted to ask you. And as this podcast is called Joyful Nourishment, I want to ask you, what does joyful nourishment mean to you? What comes to mind when you think about joyful nourishment?
I suppose the word that comes to mind is satisfaction. And I suppose it's sort of to kind of meet my needs, whatever that might be. So to fulfill needs, but to do it in a way that is pleasurable. So and I guess that could be, you know, you're talking about joyful nourishment, that could be a really lovely meal that's got lots of different textures and flavors, and that's just triggering all those lovely dopamine hits, and you know, it's really tasty. Or it might be that I'm sharing a meal in a lovely environment with people, and we're having fun and laughing and chatting, and maybe the food's not even that great, but the satisfaction comes from the environment that we're in,
Yeah.
and
The
shared
company and conversations
absolutely.
and those things.
So I guess that satisfaction can be, as I was thinking about joyful nourishment, I was thinking, emotional, spiritual, or physical, all those different levels really, and that it might not be every box that's ticked, but one or other of them,
Yeah, the satisfaction is that's such an interesting or powerful concept as well, in particular in the space around their relationship with food and eating, I think.
Being able to know, like when I gave that example of having that brunch when I was away the other week, that's what I was feeling, really satisfied, really, really, because I was with a good friend who I don't see very often. The environment was lovely and the food was great and tasty. And then I just felt like this sense of, I'd eaten enough, but not too much. And I just felt really satisfied. So it was kind of that, it ticked a lot of boxes for me.
A lot of boxes.
But I think when I had eating disorders, I was so in my head and disconnected from my body that I don't think, that was even something that I could have easily noticed, how satisfied, and maybe I wasn't directed either to think of it on that level, which I would do now with my clients. I'm very much more aware of the need to feel that whatever you've eaten has satisfied something. Like I was eating something there before we came on, corn cakes, and they were so crunchy, and I thought, I really needed that crunch. I just sometimes we just need that sort of box tick, don't we, for satisfaction. And I think that's important.
Like being aware of that as well, and when we're in the throes of struggling with our relationship with food or our bodies, like that satisfaction is a really foreign concept, or it's something, and you said earlier as well, like pleasure, doing things that are pleasurable, and that's a whole other conversation that we could have. But I think there's been really a lot that I'm hoping people will take away from this conversation that we've had today. So
I think it's just I suppose as the last thought, me and my it's all about connection.
So tell me kind of like, because that leads us really nicely into where people can find you, and if they want to connect with you online and the work that you do online as well, particularly the people want to do yoga with you, they can do that online, right?
I was thinking about, we're talking about workshops, and I was thinking I'd love to do a series of workshops called It's All About Connection, and then like maybe have one doing, connection to your inner child, and connection to your physical self, and connection to your authentic whatever, I don't know, but all these different levels that we need to connect to ourselves and to each other. So
so where can people find you?
Instagram is yoga_with_Louise. That's my sort of, I'm split at the moment between yoga and therapy. So I have Yoga with Louise, and I have Counselling Connected, and that's more my kind of counselling side of things. And then I have also 2 websites. I have douglasyogacentre.ie, and I have yogaconnected.ie. So I'm a bit all over the place at the moment in terms of.
That's okay. And Yoga Connected is your online yoga library where people can become a member, right? And
but there's other information there as well about counselling and different ways to connect with me there, and to book into sort of in-person classes and things like that.
Okay.
And then people can contact me directly by email, obviously, and my telephone numbers are right there all over the place.
And I'll put the link to all your online stuff in the show notes as well. So thank you, Louise. And I know we could keep going for a few hours, but not today. So thanks again for doing this with me, and I hope people find it useful.
Good. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Joyful Nourishment. This podcast is produced solely by me with no financial backing, and your support means a lot to keep this project going. If this episode has been helpful in any way, it really helps this podcast to help others if you click like, subscribe, or leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to this podcast on. And of course, you can also subscribe so that you won't miss any future episodes. Find out more about what I do in my private practice and what I offer over on straightforwardnutrition.com. And I am currently taking on new clients, so you will find a link to book in for a free 30-minute session in the show notes if this is something you're interested in. And finally, please come and join the Joyful Nourishment community over on Substack by subscribing to my newsletter.